Well, get on up, out of bed. Get on up. That sound's gonna teach your weary head. Get on up, out of your basement. Get on up, 'cause it's issues in child development. Yeah, issues in child development. Whoa, right on.
Good morning, everybody. On April 23rd, we're dealing in the morning with learning outcome number 6, explain the rationale for investing in early child development in Canada and around the world. It's a lovely picture of Moose Lake that I took a few years ago. Great place to camp. If you click the link, you can see where it is on Google Maps. In the developmental health module of the science of early child development, I found this statement. The debate is shifting from why invest in early childhood to how to invest in ways that are effective and far-reaching. And this is good news for us as a profession. We sometimes still get quite frustrated with not being taken seriously as professionals, but I think that there is more common understanding of the value of the work that you're doing and the very important things that children are going through in the very early years, even before entering the school system, that make the why no longer a question, but how do we best do this is a newer way, and trying to convince people to do things the way we think it might be best. This slide shows the timeline of the 4 early years studies that have been conducted to date. And it started in 1999. There was one in 2007, 2011, and now in 2020, early years study 4. I will be adding some separate audio for each one. This slide will take some time because I think it's significant for us to delve back into some of the historical research and recommendations that have been made. So please click on the audio icon for each one as well. There's hyperlinks in the names for each study that you could click, and it would take you to more further information for you to review on each one. So the early years study number 1 in 1999 was pretty cutting edge. Some of the information on the website states that it was assembled to advise the Ontario government on how to improve outcomes of young children, and it brought together the Honourable Margaret McCain and Dr. Fraser Mustard. I wanted to give you a little bit of background about Dr. Margaret McCain. She's a pretty amazing woman. She's born in Quebec and then lived in New Brunswick, where she was the first woman serving as the lieutenant governor. And then afterwards, she was very active in many organizations that support women's rights and social equality, education, and the arts. And she now lives in Toronto. And Dr. Fraser Mustard, his name might sound a little bit familiar to you because he's often referred to on the SCCD. And unfortunately, he passed away in 2011. So he was involved in these first 2 versions of the early years study and probably some of the research and collecting of data for the 2011 one as well. In the original early years study 1, it introduced a framework of understanding how early children's experiences are critical in shaping their development. And it revealed that when children lack adequate nurturing and stimulation in early childhood, that Canada's essentially overlooking its best potential talent. It called on governments to create a tier program for early childhood education that would be as crucial as the elementary and secondary school system, as well as post-secondary education. And so calling on governments to create something and having it actually come to fruition are actually 2 different things, as I'm sure you know. The early years study championed the EDI as the powerful tool to monitor how children are doing across communities, regions, and provinces. And it was really a landmark report that became a conversation changer, sparking widespread interest in how experiences in early childhood shape the brain and lifelong consequences for the individual and therefore for society. So It was really some of the initial research that was done. So let's take a look now at early years study number 2. The early years study number 2 built upon the work of the previous study, and here's some of the highlights from the website. It explained how our genes respond to our environment and how children's early experiences shape their development in the long term. It recognized the economic benefits of investing in young children and their families and demonstrated how early childhood has a crucial impact on lifelong learning, behavior, and health. It again championed the use of the EDI data as a central way of monitoring how children are developing, reported how early education could expand by building on public education, and it highlighted findings from Toronto First Duty about how current programs for young children and their families are just only a patchwork initial solution. So it achieved 3 things that, based on early years study number 2, Ontario created play-based full-day kindergarten for all 4 and 5-year-old children. It meant that other Canadian jurisdictions expanded early education within their schools. Certainly in Manitoba, there was a lot of conversation from about that time of 2007 as to whether or not we should have full-day kindergarten for our children as well. And it's still a conversation that's ongoing. The final result of early year study 2 was that the New Brunswick government called on Margaret McCain again to advise its premier on the province's early childhood strategy. And it sounds like she'd be a pretty good advocate for the work that we do. The early year study number 3 that was conducted and completed by 2011 did several things. Firstly, it proposed that publicly funded preschool education be expanded for all 2 to 5-year-old children. It would be widely available, affordable, top quality, voluntary, and parents would decide if and how often their children would attend. This early years study number 3 introduced the Early Childhood Education Report, which monitored the funding, policy, access, and quality of early childhood programming. It developed an analysis of the economic benefits of Quebec's early system and revealed that the investment more than paid for itself. I think we've seen some research about that already. It reported how early education could expand by building on public education so that maybe the 2 systems could be kind of melded together. And it highlighted findings from Toronto First Duty about how current programs for young children and their families are still only a patchwork solution. Some of the results of this study are that the Early Childhood Education Report is now produced every 3 years, and it's used to help inform policy and spending decisions of governments. There's been an expansion of early childhood education that builds on the public education system across Canada, and we've seen that certainly here as well with more full-day kindergarten programs being established as part of the public education system. It certainly had an impact on our ECE system. 2 more effects are that there's evidence of the economic benefits of investment in ECE, confirmed by leading Canadian economists and resonated with governments across Canada. And finally, this is pretty significant, public investment in early child education has more than doubled since 2011. Pretty amazing, huh? And that was as a result of this study that was completed in 2011. So the early years study number 4 has just been released in 2020, so very, very new information provided. One of the things noted by Margaret McCain was this: Early Years Study 4 calls on governments to offer early education to all preschool-aged children. The concept replaces outdated notions of daycare. Instead of a place kids go while mom works, today's early childhood education provides a first tier of education that is as important as those that follow. So, pretty strong statement right at the beginning of the document. And inside further, it provides a chart which demonstrates ECE enrollment rates compared to other OECD countries. And there's a group that goes around and compares conditions for children in all of these countries. And of all the countries listed, Canada has the third lowest percentage of ECE enrollment for children in the 0 to 5 year old bracket. The highest ones might not come as a surprise, or maybe they will. Starting from the highest at 84% is Iceland, and then I'll continue down the list. Iceland, Denmark, Belgium, Norway, Netherlands, Luxembourg, Sweden, United Kingdom, Spain, New Zealand, Israel, Ukraine, Korea, Portugal, Slovenia, Japan, Italy, Australia, France, Austria, Latvia, Mexico, Switzerland, Estonia, Hungary, Russia, Brazil, Finland, Chile, Czech Republic, United States, and Poland all rank higher than we do. Only Slovak Republic and Greece have a lower percentage of enrollment. Pretty amazing stuff, huh? The study provides 5 reasons to support universal ECE. Number 1, ECE boosts 21st century skills, suggesting that preschool learning promotes language and thinking in all the domains of development that are essential to lifelong learning. Number 2, it pays for itself. 3, supports the needs of working parents. 4, supports children from low-income families. And 5, helps infants and toddlers. And there's much more information to find. If you click the link there, you can read more about it yourself. But I love this final statement that I have here from them that says, early childhood education is the smartest investment Canada can make. And there you have it. I'd like to backtrack just a bit to the previous slide that stated that the debate is shifting from why invest in early childhood to how to invest in ways that are effective and far-reaching for children. And it's interesting to note that the Science of Early Child Development module, Developmental Health 2.4, that much of this slideshow is based on, the module used to be called The Economic Impact of Early Childhood Education and Care. And now they've changed the name of that module to be Scaling Early Child Development Programs. And so I thought we should look a little bit at what does it mean by scaling. And I found this information from the World Health Organization. Scaling is not the kind of scales indicated by the pictures here. It's not scaling fish, and it's not a weight scale, and it's not this image of me scaling that rock. That's just a joke. That's not really me scaling that big rock. Instead, what it means is that scaling means to do things in big ways to improve aspects of population health. So, I mean, you could talk about scaling up health programs for families. These are some examples that you might scale up by mobilizing more funds or more staff. You might have more output, such as more services, or maybe performing better with better quality. You might scale up the outcomes, such as reaching more people or attracting more clients, or you might scale up the impact and long-term impact. In the case of health, it could be reducing morbidity or mortality. In the case of childhood, I would say a long-term impact could be about their long-term trajectories to overall health and wellness for their lifetime. Indicated here also are 2 cross-cutting issues that should be applied to any of them are equity and sustainability. Equity, whether the results are being spread across a large portion of the population, and sustainability as to whether or not the benefits will persist on a lasting basis. And those are certainly very significant aspects. The module 2.4 in SECT's developmental health section brings forward the idea of tensions and trade-offs resulting from scaling. So if scaling means to provide a rapid increase in the number of childcare spaces, for instance, does that mean that as they increase, that quality might decrease? And I think I've probably been feeling, as maybe you have as well, if you've ever been working in a center where you have a great program going, and then all of a sudden, perhaps a colleague of yours is transferred to another location so that the benefits of well-trained staff and people that are very good at their work are spread over. It might mean that upon their leaving, your your program suffers a little bit because you're challenged and you've lost your great colleague, and that might be frustrating for you. But then the questions over here, I think, bring it into perspective. Is it better to get something to everyone or something of high quality to just a few? And that made me feel a little bit differently about those circumstances when sometimes great teams of people working together are split up to kind of share that wealth of experience and ability across to more families. And so I suppose then that comes back to the idea of how do we scale up? How do we try at our best to increase spaces and programs while still maintaining high quality? And I think that's probably going to be our biggest challenge moving forward in the future. So along came a new way of looking at things and resulting in a new kind of science called implementation science. It all made me realize that even the focus of our learning outcome, original wording of the learning outcome, was to provide a rationale for investing in early child development. Maybe that's now outdated, especially in light of how we are worried more about the how than the why are we doing these things. So the study of how to do both well, increase the number of childcare programs and ensure high quality is what is called implementation science. And if you click the link here you'll hear Maureen Black explain it, and she does a really great job of explaining it. So please go ahead and listen to her. So I'd like you next to listen to Larry Aber explain why implementation science is so important. And there's a link there that you can click to take you to that page, and then you just have to find Aber implementation science, and the brackets tell you how long the clip is. But one quote I wanted to share from him is this: if we don't learn how to do these with equal power for lower cost, the economics of the situation will not allow us to have population-based impact. What that means to me, and I wanted to explain it a little bit further, is that if we do not find ways to provide rapidly increasing amounts of programs, numbers of programs, and spaces for children at a lower cost, then we will not be able to vastly provide these across populations to have a significant impact. And so it's really interesting that, again, it comes down to the economics and cost of things. And how that works is complicated, and I don't know that I have those answers. So when it comes to scaling childcare programs in Canada, if we want to rapidly increase the number of spaces and programs so that more families can have access, how can we do that so that families can afford it? Is it free? Is it affordable? How is that going to work? And does that mean that we need institutions to provide it, such as workspaces, or do we need different levels of government to promote it? Those are the economic pieces that are a little bit beyond the abilities of my brain. Some suggest that we might mimic the Quebec model, and there's a link here for you to take a look at. And some think that the what's going on in Cuba is really quite amazing, that they have a model that reaches up to 96% of children and families. And if we go back to that chart I was speaking of in the earlier study 4, where we were the third last country of the OECD countries, I think that we were just over 50%. So a small country, a very poor country such as Cuba, has found a way to provide childcare programs that reach out to 96% of children and families. This isn't always programs that are childcare related. It's a multitude of styles of programming, but the overarching principle is to support early child development, early child learning, and their families. In terms of scaling up, we need to think about the workforce. According to SECD, skilled, nurturing caregivers are critical to any high quality early childhood program. My comment was, bet you didn't even know that, did you? Well, of course you know that. And again, that becomes the challenge. If we want to extend the effect of early childhood programs to larger populations, how do we maintain the quality of the service we're providing? And so it's a constant struggle. Opening up spaces, need more trained people. So, how do we as a society close the gap between what we know and what we do? So, what that is saying is, how do we close the gap between the why we know it's important to invest in early child development and the how? How do we get there? How do we do it? How do we how do we reach vast proportions of the population and still maintain quality? It's a difficult concept. And largely, again, what about inequality for First Nations children? There's some amazing words here shared by Cindy Blackstock, and it might be an eye opener for some of you. So when you click the link there, you will find that there's two video clips of Cindy Blackstock speaking. The first one's labeled Leave or Shuffle, and the second Supporting Equity. And she's a great speaker, so I hope you enjoy it. What can we say? Some of the final thoughts then in regards to this learning outcome are summarized, I think, in the key message by Nelson in SECD. And his advice for policymakers is to listen to the science. And it's a worthy read, and I think a good way to wrap up this learning outcome. So upon doing that, you may move ahead to the learning outcome number 7 slides.